If the Politburo deemed it was beneficial for China to attain its human powers to overpower Philippines, and it was in China's interest, we think it's perfectly fine for a state to do so, seeing that it's in the benefit of the state. South opposition needs to listen to the debate today and take on the angle coming from the side government right now. We told you why this debate needed to revolve on an angle of why it would necessarily be the state's interest. That means the individual state, or why it would be beneficial for themselves, ladies and gentlemen, because that's war and how it matters in that situation. Please don't judge here because you didn't respond in your elbow anyway. But before we move to arguments, 3 points rebuttals. Firstly, the idea of rights of volunteers in this situation and how it's so horrible. 2 responses to that. Firstly, they fail to analyze the idea of soldiers coming up from my Prime Minister. Because we really told you that soldiers also suffer many physical and emotional harms in this situation. Many of them suffer like for example, post-stress disorder or something like that. I can't remember his name. But the same benchmark also applies because you talked about it as well. So if you argue against that, you also argue for any form of warfare and standing army that any country has right now. Because the same utilitarian purpose applies, that we acknowledge this form of sacrifice because utilitarian purpose means because I'm sacrificing this for my state right now, and that's a good purpose right now. So thank you. But keep quiet. Secondly, the whole idea of going against the state in this situation. Well, that same situation can also apply for a soldier that's currently sitting in the jet. You cannot just assume that a soldier would go against the state in this situation, because a soldier sitting in the jet can also have enough power to fly away and still shoot any city of his home nation in that situation. So that equal argument is still applied in this code right now. But we don't base our principle just because of the possibility of these people abusing his power in this situation. What we base our possibility on is how countries can utilize this to defend against enemies in this situation. We think that we need to respond to that. Second point, argument, the whole idea of alternative. 2 responses. Firstly, this never deconstructed our idea to begin with, because that doesn't necessarily prove that our paradigm was necessarily not mutually exclusive in this situation. Because ultimately, when they don't prove something else that can also offer the same benefits that we told you about and give some more examples, then that argument doesn't fly to the debate. But secondly, the alternative doesn't negate the forms of benefit that we talked about. Because just saying that the alternative doesn't mean that we shouldn't do risk to begin with. So that's a stupid argument. Last argument, the whole idea of imbalance, and this is the bulk of the case. 4 responses. Firstly, well, you never differentiated to begin compared to status quo, because many countries right now, like United States and China, have massive nuclear weapons compared to countries like Malaysia and Singapore in that situation. We have all this is already imbalanced in status quo, but how do countries strategically approach this situation right now? That's what we're arguing about. But secondly, we argue that it's way better in our situation because smaller countries can also develop this. I'll elaborate that in my point later, and directly engages with this thing. But thirdly, when I QI to you, what about this situation? What was the response? The response was, well, these smaller countries have allies. Well, that same benchmark can also apply to our paradigm right now. Because, well, if US developed a superhuman, well, I guess they could share it with Israel as well in that situation. So the same benchmark still applies in this code. So your problem isn't mutually exclusive. Therefore, it's already a check and balance that exists within the system. We don't see a problem there. But they also talk to you about overconfidence. We tell you what? There's no logical link to why necessarily having superhuman powers necessarily make your army extremely radical in this situation. If anything, that's arguing against developing a gun, because now somehow that empowers you to shoot even more. We tell you that's already a risk calculus of any standing army in this situation, and how the strategic countries approach in any situation will already balance that out. But going into my arguments, yes ma'am.
Sir, do you think that just because they have the technology to engage war and have the probability to actually win, does that mean they should do it?
If it means that they could protect their state better, then we say yes, ladies and gentlemen. Why not? Because if you as a country, you as for example Philippines, right? If you could defend yourself better against China, with superhero, then obviously you will produce it because it's your self-interest, and that's the angle we talked to you about. Let's move on to the next dimension of the debate. Why this is necessarily better overall as well, and this that if you want to argue on their paradigm, then my argument also argues for that as well. 2 arguments. Firstly, how does concentrate wars and fights in one particular parameter? Because let's analyze the characteristics of status quo versus our paradigm of Marvel comic powers. Because in their side of the house, the biggest weapon you have in status quo is, for example, nuclear weapons. For example, that's the ultimate mutually assured destruction on their side. I'll go back to our side, whereby the biggest threat is probably a superhuman, like Iron Man in that situation, right? But also on their side, there's a massive parameter of destruction when you use this form of nuclear weapon, even in a situation where you use it. Versus our side, where the attack is probably concentrated on a central unit of war, when you send an individual like Iron Man to for example, the Politburo or the Russian central capital in that situation. What it does is 2 things. Firstly, it shifts war into a human capacity, ladies and gentlemen. That means now, states are more likely to utilize one-on-one superheroes compared to the status quo right now. Where who's secondly, it shifts also states' approach into war into a more clandestine operations versus massive blowups. Because like simple Marvel Comics heroes like the Black Widow, who's like a super spy, and they portray her as a superhuman anyway, we tell you these people and these powers can focus more into retrieving information and utilize that form of superpowers compared to their forms of case whereby like invading, get info in forms of cyber warfare, which cause also massive amount of harm towards it, like electrical grids which affect people directly. The conclusion to this argument is this: there's less political leverage in our situation because this is reduced more into a human capacity and individual compared to massive amounts of weapons in the situation. Therefore, that argument stands. Second argument: how does empower defense of smaller nations? Because countries like Georgia don't have a lot of room for militia, like Singapore as well. Ultimately, but when in our paradigm to produce a superhuman, we probably just have a lab where you can produce superhumans in that situation. Like we saw in Captain America. What it does is, firstly, it levels the playing field in the situation because now there's a better balance between small nations and big nations which don't necessarily have allies in your paradigm. Therefore, you shift the determining factor of nation's power to how advanced your technology is compared to how big your country's perimeter necessarily is. What it does, it necessarily shifts things the balance between big nations and smaller nations in the end. I think that's a marginal benefit towards smaller nations. But secondly, we also avoid forms of proxy wars because countries like Afghanistan in history have been utilized by the US for proxy wars in this situation. Whilst they are effectively smaller nations and more incapable nations. But when they are effectively implement our mechanism right now where they can develop superpowers like reading minds, they can ascertain anonymity and questions that ultimately are the attacks towards them. Therefore, Afghanistan now can ascertain that US was the one that really did all this and the intent behind that. What it does is that allows these countries to push for legal recourse when you can ascertain those harms and to surpass the lies and bills that are available in the human capacity. We think that's a marginal benefit on our side.